This is Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz with Sermons for Snowbirds. Parshat Bo, the year 5774, 2014 in the secular calendar. And we're finally starting a new season. It's pretty cold here. I hope it's a bit warmer where you are. I very often, when I open my computer, I get a pop-up ad on some of the websites that I browse, in which this minister in the South, in the United States, says that he has the biblical secrets to investing. Yes, the biblical secrets to investing. Now, personally, I'm always very cynical about these types of websites because, from my perspective, the Tanakh, the Bible, is not intended as an investing handbook. The Tanakh is a religious guide. It's not a guide to investments. And in fact, this is a point that the Abrabanel makes in his commentary to the Torah, that the Tanakh is not intended as a healing guide, as a medical textbook. It doesn't come to teach you things to make you healthier. And so, of course, it's a mistake to look at the Tanakh as teaching you something about investing, but at the same time, although the Tanakh doesn't teach us about investing or doesn't teach us about medicine, there are points where you could read the Tanakh and you could begin to learn various insights into certain disciplines that are other than religion. And of course, in last week's Torah reading, we actually have a few moments in which you can begin to learn the art of negotiation. You know, I remember once hearing the great Herb Cohen, who is considered to be the worldwide expert on negotiation. And I remember him hearing him speak and talking about different types of negotiations. Because sometimes you're negotiating from a strong position, sometimes you're negotiating from a weak position. So Herb Cohen was explaining to our group, which was a Jewish group, that actually Abraham's negotiations with God over the city of Sodom would be a classic example of how you would conduct a negotiation when you are sitting in the weaker position. Of course, whenever you conduct a negotiation, you have to understand, what position am I in? Am I in the stronger position or am I in the weaker position? And so Cohen explained to us that the way that Abraham dealt with God when talking about whether God should spare or destroy the city of Sodom, the way that Abraham dealt with him is actually the classic example of how you negotiate from a weak position. That you go to the person and you say, well, why don't you think it over? Come on, you've been nice. Why don't you throw something in? Why don't you help me out? That essentially negotiating from a weak position is really just a sophisticated form of begging. And that's what Cohen noted about that particular passage in the Bible. Now, if you look in Parshat Bo, there's actually a very fascinating moment which involves negotiation. And it has to do with the plague, the 8th of the 10 plagues, which is the plague of grasshoppers, of Arba. And this plague of grasshoppers or locusts, Moses comes in and he warns Pharaoh, and Moshe tells him there's going to be this plague. And then we're told immediately afterwards in the Torah that after Moshe tells Paro that there's going to be this plague, Vayifen vayetze me'im Paro. Then Moshe turned and he left from before Pharaoh. And actually, I shouldn't have translated the word Vayifen because its translation, as we'll see in a moment, is actually a matter of controversy. But of course, the commentaries to the Bible are very fascinated. Why do we need to be told that Moshe walked out from before Pharaoh? So what's interesting is if you look at the Ramban explains that Moses walked out from Pharaoh in an abrupt fashion. And he did so because he wanted to push Pharaoh to change his ways. And that Moses understood that if he sat there and kept trying to push Pharaoh and trying to get him to release the Jews, instead of just coming in and saying, this is the plague that's coming. This is it. I'm leaving. You figure it out. That the Ramban says that he sat around and sat there with Pharaoh while Pharaoh would have been working out what to do. Pharaoh's reaction would have been different. That Moshe understood that because he was coming from such a strong position, he needed to allow Paro to work it out on his own, not to sit there and try to push Paro along. And this is a valuable insight into an unusual type of negotiation, which, by the way, does come up from time to time. You have two parties, both of whom assume they are the stronger party. Moshe knows that he is the stronger party in the negotiation. Paro believes he is the stronger party in the negotiation. And so Moshe has to walk out to let Paro and his servants discuss it amongst themselves so that they come to the realization on their own that they better do something. If Moshe is the one who keeps pushing, they won't get there. So here you have immediately a negotiating insight that sometimes you need to let the other guy figure it out on his own. Paro was once powerful. He now needs to learn that he's no longer the powerful party in this particular negotiation, that he's no longer negotiating from the stronger position. And so Moshe has to walk out. Moshe has to say, you work it out yourselves. Now what's interesting is that Ibn Ezra offers another insight into negotiation. Ibn Ezra says, and he brings two commentaries which are actually Karaite commentaries, but he brings them approvingly, in which the word Vayithen is translated by one of the commentaries as indicating that Moshe walked out backwards. So instead of the Bible saying, and Moshe turned and walked out and left Paro, actually what the Bible says is, and Moshe walked out backwards and left from before Paro. Now what is the meaning of walking out backwards? So this is an idea that's already found in the Talmud. In fact, we just had a discussion of it in the Daf Yomi, that when you walk away from somebody or something that you respect, you walk backwards. And in fact, if you go to the Kotel, if you go to the Western Wall, you'll see that many people, when leaving the Western Wall, will walk backwards out of the plaza. And that's a way of showing respect to the wall. And similarly, if you're leaving a king, what you do is you walk out backwards without turning your back on the king. In fact, there are many students who will leave their Rosh Yeshiva, they will leave their teacher, only walking out backwards, so as to show absolute respect to the person before leaving the office, that I won't turn my back on you until I walk out the door. And this is the idea that Ibn Ezra says that actually, rather than Moshe leaving abruptly in middle of the discussion and basically saying, you figure it out on your own, according to Ibn Ezra, when Moshe left, he left walking out backwards, showing absolute respect to Paro. And one has to wonder, why did Moshe have to do that? If this is correct, what is the meaning of Moshe's gesture? Moshe is having a difficult negotiation with Paro. So what's the meaning of having this wonderful gesture of respect? And I think actually that's precisely the point. That we are learning another lesson about negotiations. That the only way that you can conduct negotiations is if you maintain mutual respect in all situations. Even here, where Moshe knows that Paro is long gone, where Moshe knows what the outcome is going to be, where Moshe knows all of the terrible things that Paro has done over the years, Moshe still walks out backwards. Because you have another lesson about negotiations over here. That you never take away your respect for the other party. Because if you treat the other party with contempt, then you've essentially closed down the negotiations for good. And so if you look at the commentaries, you look at the Ramban, you look at the Ibn Ezra, although these are not textbook lessons on how you should negotiate, it certainly is wonderful wisdom to think about when you're conducting a negotiation. And I know that there are negotiations going on right now in Israel, and they are difficult negotiations. And to many of us, we believe that they're futile negotiations. But even if they're futile, these negotiations have to be conducted both with wisdom and respect to ensure that not only do you negotiate well, but you negotiate correctly in addition. Have a wonderful week, and we look forward to sharing more sermons for snowbirds in the future.